Going to talk about how to summarize. Okay, so we're just going to talk about it today. We're going to take some notes in our writer's notebooks today, and then tomorrow we're going to start practicing how to summarize. So I just kind of want to put it in your head for something to think about as you're reading and writing today. Okay, so there are 3 main steps for summarizing. The first step is read. Obviously, you have to read something in order to summarize it. So as you read, you're going to be reading to gather important information, and you might even want to take notes while you're reading. So remember on Friday when I asked you to have a spiral notebook? We're going to start using that spiral notebook not today, but tomorrow when we start reading for summarizing, we're going to have that spiral notebook out so that we can take notes on what we're reading. Okay? Now, as we're reading to summarize, we're going to need to pause while we're reading to ask ourselves, is this important enough to include in a summary? Because as you know, when you're reading, especially fiction, there are a lot of details and descriptions and things that are interesting, but they don't necessarily move the story forward. And so we will talk a little bit more about that. And then your last step for summarizing is to use your own words as you write your summary. And that just means when you're summarizing, you don't need to copy any of the sections of what you've read. Because if you copy someone else's words, especially if it says summary by Corinne Crawford, and then you copy words from the text, it's called plagiarizing because you're basically stealing someone's words and saying, they're mine. Okay, so we want to be really careful to use your own words. So if you're doing a lot of thinking while you're reading, you have a better chance of having your own words in your summary. Okay, so we're going to get started by adding these notes into the note side of our writer's notebook. Okay, so you're going to start on the note side. Now remember, we have been doing all of our work so far, like our big cheese writing and all that. That has all gone in the practice side. That's the backwards and upside down side. Our note side is the front side, like the correct side of our notebook. And when we open it up, the first thing we see is our table of contents. So we're going to start by adding to our table of contents. Nope, we're good. Okay, so we're going to open our notebook to the table of contents, and we're going to add a new note here. So this is going to be entry number 2. And we're going to call this lesson number 2, how to summarize. And we're going to put today's date over here.
Mrs.
How
Crawford,
to summarize. Yes?
what are we doing right now? Because
look at the screen. Look at the screen, Carolina. We're in our writer's notebook. I'm in the table of contents, and we're writing down number 2, how to summarize. Okay.
Is it in the front or the back?
It's in the front, in the notes side. You look for your table of contents. You should find it there. Okay. Don't freak out. I am going to turn the page, but I'm going to write the same thing. So if you're still doing your table of contents, you can still do it. You can still copy it down. Okay. What I want to tell you is remind you of our rules for the note side of our table of contents. And part of the rules are we only write on the front side. So we're not going to write on the back. And that's special for the notes side. So this side we have our notebook rules. That was entry number 1. So I'm going to turn the page, but I am not going to write on this back side. We've been writing in the back side in our practice side, and that's okay. But in the note side, we are only going to write on the front side of the page. So I'm going to write the exact same thing that I wrote in my table of contents. which is number 2, lesson number 2, how to summarize. So you should be writing this in your notebook as well. That way you have these notes to look back on. So your notebook should look just like mine. How to summarize. And because this is a new note entry, I like to highlight it. This is exactly what you wrote in your table of contents. Getting it, Ethan? Okay. You might remember the first step of how to summarize. Step number 1 is read. You'll have to have something to summarize. So step number 1 is read. And maybe you want to draw yourself a little book. So that just to kind of help you remember, it looks like a little mustache sometimes when I draw my books. And our little eyes, there's our good reader, reading something very interesting. Okay, and we'll put a little nose. So your first step is to read. And here's why we read. So we're going to put these notes off to the side. I'm going to put them here. We read to gather important information. And while we read, we might want to take some notes. Okay, so we read to gather important information. And while we read, we might want to take some notes. Hey, Bobby, we're working in our writer's notebook. We added a new entry in our table of contents, number 2, how to summarize, and that's what we're writing down here. We covered the first step when we're summarizing is to read. We're reading to gather important information, and we might have to take some notes. Maybe we could put I'm going to put a little star down here and say spiral reading notebook to help us remember that we might want to take our notes in the reader's notebook. Okay. Step 2 to summarizing. Oh, I gotta get a new lead here. Come to me, lead. There it is. Step 2 is to pause. Okay, and I'm gonna draw myself a little thought bubble because the whole purpose of pausing while we read is to think to ourselves, and we want to ask, I'm going to write it first and then I'll draw my thought bubble around it. Is this important enough to include in a summary? Oops. So I'm going to draw myself a little bubble. And then if you ever read any graphic novels or things, usually a bubble with some dots like this is showing that someone is having a thought. Okay, so this is what you think when you pause. Is this important enough to include in a summary? And I'm going to make myself a little note that says, does it move the story forward? That's step 2. Okay, step 3 is the last step of summarizing, and it is write. Okay? And the important thing about writing is that you want to use your own words. You're not copying from the text. You want to use your own words. So I'm going to draw a little pencil. This reminds me of our Direct to Draw. Remember we drew a little pencil that day? So those are our 3 steps to summarizing.